Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers crime scene contamination, filing a formal complaint, and officer retaliation, and comes to us from the Batosize channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Chicago Transit Authority Supervisor, experience a new tape. On February 4th, 2020, street musician Michael Malinowski was playing guitar at the Jackson Red Line station in Chicago, Illinois, when a 38-year-old mentally ill woman attacked him. 35-year-old Chicago Transit Authority Supervisor Martisa Lee received a call over her radio about the incident and responded immediately. Officers from the Chicago Police Department quickly arrived on the scene, arrested the suspect, and called for medical assistance for Mr. Malinowski. Authorities determined that the platform was a crime scene, but were unable to cordon off the area because they did not have enough of their standard yellow tape to do so. The Chicago Tribune reported that more than a dozen people walked through the unmarked crime scene before Officer Raymond Herron spotted Mrs. Lee and confronted her.
There's an AW.
No, they gotta go on the outside. This is all a crime scene.
What's with that?
Yeah, he's grabbing after the victim. Watch out, ma'am, come on.
Wait, the toes are not. Just tell me.
Out here. I gotta say, oh yeah, you need to get out of the crime scene, man. Please get out of the crime scene.
No?
That's what I'm telling you.
And you're touching me now.
Because you're in the crime scene, and I'm asking you to stay here.
me.
You're not doing the crime scene.
And I'm doing my job. Do not touch me.
You're not doing your job. You can do your job from right there.
Do not touch me.
You can do your job
Don't
from right
touch
there.
me again.
Don't go through the crime
Don't
scene again.
touch me
Then don't go
again.
through the crime scene again.
Don't touch me again.
Then don't go through the crime scene
Don't
again. It's
touch
very
me
simple.
again. It's very
We can go back and forth all
We
day.
can't. Don't touch me.
Preserving the condition of a crime scene is a vital element of the investigatory process. And as noted by Assistant Director of the Criminal Justice Institute, Dr. Cheryl May, crime scene contamination usually results through the actions of the personnel at the scene. In general, the greater number of personnel at the scene, the more likely it is that the scene or evidence will be contaminated. The National Institute of Justice's Crime Scene Investigation Manual states that controlling, identifying, and removing persons at the crime scene, and limiting the number of persons who enter the crime scene and the movement of such persons is an important function of the initial responding officers in protecting the crime scene, and institutes a policy that the initial responding officers shall identify persons at the crime scene and control their movement. The manual's procedure instructs officers to control all individuals at the scene and prevent them from altering or destroying physical evidence by restricting movement, location, and activity, while ensuring and maintaining safety at the scene, and to exclude unauthorized and non-essential personnel from the scene, including law enforcement officials not working the case. Although some people had walked through the crime, the officers were making a legitimate effort to secure the area, and Officer Herron was well within his authority to control the movement of anyone walking through the scene who was not directly investigating the crime that had taken place. Approximately 7 minutes after Officer Herron removed Mrs. Lee from the crime scene, Sergeant William Spiker arrives, and Mrs. Lee confronts him about Officer Herron's conduct.
Your officers, but we can deal with this first and then we'll talk about that later.
What's that?
He
Ow.
grabbed me.
Why?
I
Were you in
have
the
no
crime
idea.
scene or something?
I'm walking, talking, and they was telling me to assess the situation. He grabbed me and pushed me over.
Maybe you were in the crime scene. I'm not sure.
Standing right there, I'm not by the
They
blood,
wouldn't
and I'm
grab
walking
you
over
just for
talking.
no reason, though.
He grabbed me and pushed me. Clearly, it could be seen too.
Okay.
Him right there.
Do you want me to ask him why?
I want something to be done.
Well,
because
if
that
he
was
tells me
uncalled
that you were obstructing the crime scene, we're going to arrest you.
for. You're not going to arrest me
Yes,
for
we
doing
are.
my job. This is my job.
We're
I'm
not
gonna-
going to... That's the way it's going
just
to
saying.
go. If you
It's
want
not
to
going to go that way
complain,
because this is my
that'll
job.
be his job, though. You'll be
Exactly. And
obstructing
I'm the
his job,
supervisor
which
that
is...
was told to assess the thing. So if I'm not stepping on the blood.
Mrs. Lee makes the assertion that because she was not in the exact area where the crime took place, then she should not have been moved. However, the scope of a crime scene is not limited to the immediate area of which the crime took place. The NIJ's Crime Scene Investigation Manual states that boundaries are established beyond the initial scope of the crime scene, with the understanding that the boundaries can be reduced in size if necessary, but cannot be as easily expanded. The manual's policy states that the initial responding officers at the scene shall conduct an initial assessment of the extent of the crime scene, and then establish and control its boundaries. Whether or not Mrs. Lee was near any of the vital elements of the crime scene is irrelevant. The officers are within their authority to establish and control any areas they deem relevant to the investigation.
Now
That's
you're
not-
playing apples and oranges. This
I'm not.
is our
Apples and
crime
oranges
scene.
is not to be pushed.
Okay, I'm going to ask him.
You can ask him
Are you the
whatever.
supervisor?
Yes, I am.
Is it worth it to you that serious for this?
Yes, because he pushed me. Did I? If I
Did he
pushed
push
you,
you
when I
out of
did
the crime scene?
Yes, I almost took the blue tactile.
They pushed me too because I didn't know I was in the middle of
That's
it.
your guys. I don't let no man allow me. I don't care if
He didn't push you
yes,
down. He
it
moved
doesn't
you.
matter, but he pushed
He
me.
touched you.
Exactly.
So what's
You're not
the problem?
supposed to touch me. What
Yes,
do you
he
mean?
can touch you.
Can I touch you and grab you the way he grabbed me?
We can touch you to move you out
Can
of a
I
crime
touch you
scene.
and grab you the way he grabbed me?
Ma'am, we can touch you to move you out of a crime scene.
So I can touch you and move you.
No,
out of
you
the crowd.
can't touch me. We
is
can
my
touch
job
you.
too. Okay, I can touch.
I mean, her job is to serve the people, right? And by definition, it means doing a good job of the fucking crime scene and a story. But if that means that getting touched, pushed, yeah, so fucking be it. So what? I mean,
This is not your job. This is our job.
Officers of the Chicago Transit Authority have no investigatory powers in regards to violations of state laws. As a CTA supervisor, Mrs. Lee's primary function at the crime scene was to oversee stops in the loop and determine which train should be stopped or rerouted. Nothing in her official capacity would grant her access to a restricted crime scene once the Chicago Police Department took over the scene. It is important to review the moment that Officer Herron ushered Mrs. Lee out of the crime scene, as she continues to assert the notion that Officer Herron pushed her out of the way. The body cam footage shows that the officer physically guided Mrs. Lee out of the crime scene and did not forcefully push or shove her as she claims.
Your job is to
What
conduct the
y'all job?
train.
Exactly, and I was talking to my manager to let them.
Your
assess
job
it.
is to work with the
And-
trains. This is now our crime scene. If you're in
You
the
can
middle
have
of it, we
but
can
if
move
you're
you out of
pushing
it.
me,
Yes.
I'm not
We're
your
gonna
crime
move you
scene.
out of the crime
But I'm
scene.
not your crime scene to push.
There's no complaint. If that's your complaint, there's no complaint.
10-4. Can I have your badge and stuff?
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'm gonna talk to him then.
No, that's fine. But that's fine. Whatever you said, that's fine.
Which one of you guys grabbed her?
Because she was walking through the crime scene to get out of the crime scene, and I took her from behind and I guided her outside
you
the crime
pushed me.
scene. I did not push. Everything's on camera.
You're absolutely
You're
right.
absolutely
Perfect.
right.
That's perfect.
So
Everything's on camera.
he just moved you out of the crime scene, is what he's saying.
No, I didn't push.
He's grabbed you and moved you out of the crime
That's
scene.
fine. But anyway, you said you needed what from me, sir? You needed something from
They
me.
need you to hold the tape. They want you, they say you're a supervisor, you can hold the tape. You can hold the tape for them.
What do you mean hold the tape?
The tape off that camera.
Because you have to get that from control center. I can't just.
No, that's the
You can't,
that's another unit.
Okay.
Okay.
Was she obstructing the crime scene?
Yes. I told her, it's all on my body camera. I told her she had to get out of the crime scene. She kept walking. I told her she had to get out of the crime scene. I
Did
told
she
her,
continue in our crime scene?
Walking
Yes.
away from the crime scene, he pushed
Did she
me. I guess
continue
I
in
wasn't
our
walking
crime
fast
scene?
enough for him. No, I didn't. He pushed me right over there. It'll all be seen.
He's
But
saying-
you guess what?
walked
It's all
from
on
here.
camera, and I'm done with it now. If
walked
you
from
guys
here.
do whatever
I don't.
you want.
I mean, are we done with this? I mean, he's explaining what he
No, I'm not
did.
done with it. Y'all can be done with it.
You're not done with it?
Oh, I'm not. Because
Do you want to have her arrested for obstructing our crime scene?
I'm on
She can laugh all she wants, but she cannot obstruct our crime scene.
Although Sergeant Spiker may be within his authority to arrest Mrs. Lee for obstructing the crime scene, it is clear that the motivation to effectuate an arrest was derived from Mrs. Lee's intention to file a complaint against Officer Herron. A former supervisor of Chicago's police oversight agency, Lorenzo Davis, told the Chicago Tribune that it is unlikely Officer Herron would face disciplinary action for removing
My
Lee from the
first
crime
sub
scene,
on this
but also
channel
stated,
after watching
quote,
for 3
everyone has a
years.
right to file a
Thank
complaint.
you for
An
providing
arrest should
content
never
to-
be conditioned on whether that person drops the complaint or not. Chicago is one of the few cities that has both a Bureau of Internal Affairs and a Civilian Office of Police Accountability, which essentially work congruently with one another whenever a complaint is filed. Sergeant Spiker does not retain the authority to dictate whether a complaint against an officer is valid. And according
yeah, I think it's about being the bigger person, and you don't do an action because somebody says it's gonna do one, right? You want to do an action, you do it, or you don't. You don't do it because they're doing something. Otherwise, it's just weird. It's just weird.
According to the Chicago Tribune, city policy requires officers to report a complaint to the Civilian Office of Police Accountability within 1 hour of receiving it. Sergeant Spiker chose to arrest Mrs. Lee only after she insisted on filing a complaint, which is an obvious act of retaliation.
Yeah.
Was she obstructing our crime scene?
She did not. That's when I told her, I said, maybe gotta get out of the crime scene. She didn't listen. I told her several times. That's when I
I'm
took
on
her
the
to
radio. He didn't tell me several incidents. He pushed me from behind.
We can look at my body camera.
We sure can.
Okay, arrest her. Put your hands behind your back.
Officer Heron places Mrs. Lee into handcuffs, and Mrs. Lee's manager arrives on the scene shortly thereafter. After some negotiations with the CPD officers, Mrs. Lee is released and allowed to go free without any charges. According to the Chicago Tribune, Mrs. Lee's name appeared on the CPD's official incident report, accusing her of obstruction of justice and potentially contaminating the crime scene, but failed to mention Mrs. Lee's request to lodge a complaint or that she was detained for another 7 minutes after Officer Heron removed her from the unmarked crime scene. Following the encounter, Mrs. Lee filed a formal complaint with the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, who recommended that Sergeant Spiker be stripped of his police powers while it investigates the complaint. Chicago Superintendent David Brown has not yet responded to the notification, and the sergeant continues to serve in his official capacity. Mrs. Lee has since filed a federal lawsuit alleging that the officers falsely arrested her and violated her First Amendment rights, and is still employed with the Chicago Transit Authority. Overall, Officer Heron and Sergeant Spiker get a C-.
Yeah, that's what I
because
thought.
although they were within their authority to order Mrs. Lee to evacuate the crime scene, they principally arrested her for attempting to file a complaint, did not appropriately document the encounter, and made no effort to de-escalate the interaction. As mentioned earlier, Officer Heron did nothing wrong by removing Mrs. Lee from the crime scene. However, every complaint against an officer should be taken seriously, and Sergeant Spiker's...
The next one, the girl gets, Settle down, give me a minute. You know what? She gets a D. She gets a D. D minus, not F. Because she wasn't that bad after the fact, but her job is to, you know, serve and protect and be a public servant, right? Type of thing. Isn't that like the whole police thing is? And I think it's kind of weird to be told, hey man, it's a crime scene, you're gonna contaminate it and you're gonna ruin it, whatever, and having such a disregard for evidence. I think that's a problem. That's the basis of policing. She's just gonna ruin it. So that's the D minus.
Dismissal of Mrs. Lee's claims and reluctance to include her complaint in any official reports indicate that her arrest was an act of retaliation. Instead of assuming Mrs. Lee was wrong and ignoring her complaint,
why, she's not a police officer? Why, she's not... I thought she was the police. Wait, she's a what? Oh, hell nah. Oh, she's F.
he could have simply taken her complaint, directed her to the proper resources for filing a complaint, and allowed the Bureau of Internal Affairs and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability to assess the validity of Mrs. Lee's claims. It is difficult to justify any of the CPD officers' actions beyond removing
She's still
Mrs.
D
Lee from the
minus.
scene, and it will be interesting to see how the department handles the complaints and the ensuing lawsuit. Mrs. Lee also gets a C-.
Oh, come
because although she may have
on.
been detained in retaliation, she initially refused to leave the crime scene, made false claims about Officer Heron pushing her, and escalated the encounter by being hostile and confrontational. Much of Mrs. Lee's conduct was driven by her damaged ego from being forced to leave the crime scene, and she would have been better off filing her complaint with the proper authorities rather than seeking immediate reprimand of all.
Imagine being wrongly convicted of a crime or some shit because some motherfucker walk through a crime scene and fuck your evidence. Imagine being in that position where you're running because of some mother-sucking moron.
Sir Heron,
Dude.
I have no doubt that Mrs. Lee's detainment was unjust. However, her actions alone caused the initial dispute, and she was extremely antagonistic about being lawfully removed from the crime scene. All that said, Mrs. Lee should never have been faced with the choice of filing a complaint or being arrested, and there is merit to her lawsuit against the officers. In this interaction, both parties were right in some ways and wrong in some ways. And justice for one part...
The police should know better. I'm sorry, I'm just saying, the police should know better. It's their job to know better, though.
...does not necessarily equate to justice for the other. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.
How? Because as a civilian, you don't have any job except to follow the law, right? That's kind of your job as a civilian. is to follow the law and not be a dumb fuck, right? But if you want to be a dumb fuck within the scope of the law, you're still kind of chilling, right? The cops, their job is to know the law, apply it, and not be a dumb fuck, even outside the scope of the law, right? Like remaining cordial, being the bigger person, shit like that, and then yeah, literally, that's their job. They're public servants, literally. They serve the public. Your taxes pay for this shit, so you should hope that they help.
My mind and I5X at roulette.
You pay for that shit.
Please
literally, you do pay for that shit.
Will transfer xQcl.